What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On NBA, the biggest stories with the local experts. I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, also host of Locked On Rockets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Today, we're chatting with Evan Dammarell from Locked On Cavaliers as, hey, maybe the Cleveland Cavaliers could be in the running for LeBron James if things don't work out with the LA Lakers. Plus, what's the latest on Colin Sexton and the supposed staring contest between him and the Cavaliers? But first, a quick message from our friends over at Built Bar, because when it comes to protein bars, you've got to check out Built Bar. They're the number one protein bar on the market for a very good reason. Every single bar is coated in 100% delicious chocolate. They're soft. They're not, they're soft, they're chewy. They're not gritty or chalky like other protein bars on the market. And the flavors that they have to offer, it's just incredible. You got salted caramel, strawberry, raspberry, mint brownie, peanut butter, coconut brownie chunks, my personal favorite, cookies and cream. The list really goes on and on and on. You can check them out. Just go to built.com and use promo code LOCK15 to get 15% off your very next order of the best tasting protein bars on the market. Every single bar is low cal, low sugar, high protein, high fiber. Amazing if you're on a keto diet. Amazing if you're trying to cut back a little bit, maybe lose a little bit of weight. Just go check them out. Again, that's promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at built.com. Joining us now is Evan Dammarell from Locked On Cavs. You can follow him on the Bird app on Twitter at @amnotevan. Now, Evan, it's the time of the offseason, right? Speculation is running rampant, and there's a lot going on with the Los Angeles Lakers right now. That organization has a lot to try and figure out before this next season, and because of that, there is some speculation about whether or not LeBron James' future is actually going to be in LA. Right now, he's able to, if he wants to sign a 2-year, almost $100 million extension, has yet to do that because, let's face it, the future in LA seems rather uncertain about whether or not that team has played, its last game of meaningful basketball, if they're going to be able to resolve the Russell Westbrook situation. And as is wont to do at this point in the offseason, we're kind of looking at this as, well, what would the next chapter possibly be for LeBron James with Bronny Jr. making his way into the NBA about a year from now? What could that potentially look like? What teams might be in the running for acquiring King James's future services? And the Cavaliers seem to be a really interesting option to maybe have James return to Cleveland for not the second time, but now the third time coming back. What would a return to Cleveland even mean for LeBron James, his legacy, and kind of where this Cavs team kind of currently find themselves with this young core that they have?
Well, to be frank, if they can't match Genie Bus's offer of a free PlayStation 5, I don't know if anyone really can at this point. But it's an interesting thought exercise. I think it's something that's kind of certainly been on the minds of Cavs fans, especially during All-Star when LeBron was more than being calculated with his comments. I think it was more so his frustrations with the Lakers and just how that season was going in general. And I think him just kind of waxing poetic about his time at the Cavaliers in Cleveland and just, him kind of, in theory, being back home really led to that rampant speculation. But a lot of folks have said at this point, myself included, and whether in written form or verbal form, that the longer this drags out, and let's be frank, like Thursday, he was eligible to sign that extension with the Lakers. By no means that's a deadline at this point. I think he has till June 4th of next year off the top of my head. So anything can happen between now and then, but this is definitely a LeBron play. I think this is him maximizing leverage, like you said, trying to figure out maybe the situation with the Lakers, because I do think he wants to stay there. But if he did come back to the Cavs, it would certainly be interesting. I wonder if you're Cleveland. Let's be frank, any team in the league is going to be willing to have LeBron James, but maybe you don't want to mess up a good thing you have going here. This is a Cavs team that certainly takes a lot of pride in the fact that they very well could be the first team since the 97-98 Cavaliers, a time when most of the team wasn't even alive at that point. Could make the playoffs without LeBron on their roster, which is huge. But if he were to come back, I wouldn't say it's ring chasing necessarily. I think I made the argument, at least because it was in my Write Down UConn newsletter. I had a listener or a reader ask a question about it. And I said, I think this would be, at least in theory, one of the more talented teams he's been on. I mean, that first stint with the Lakers when he had all those young talent, and then that obviously consolidated to AD, like that was a pretty talented team too. So it'd be interesting in terms of legacy. If he could squeeze out a championship or two, that'd be great. But I think Cleveland fans would just be happy to be like a consistent, at least considered a consistent playoff, possibly title threat, because let's be frank, LeBron's going to be entering his 40s pretty soon. But I remain of the opinion that he'll ultimately go back with the Lakers, wait till Bronny is draft eligible, and then it will be a ultimate free for all between all 30 teams in the league to try and get LeBron to come to their team. Because I think if you draft Bronny, you may punch your ticket into getting one King James on your roster as well.
Yeah, it kind of seems like that might just be like a 2-for-1 sale at that point, where it's like, all right, if you can draft Bronny Jr., then you're basically you've guaranteed yourself, one season of LeBron James at least, so that he can play alongside his son as that kind of father-son duo in the league. But I do wonder, Evan, right? Like, following the this thought exercise, right? Let's say that team that lands Bronny Jr. would be the Cavaliers, right? And LeBron's like, all right, I'm coming home. I want to come play with my son. Would you be at all worried that would be, that there would maybe be more like fanfare associated with that, almost like a farewell season, rather than, bringing him back for the opportunity to actually play really high level competitive basketball, or at least looking at it through the lens of, if you were to make that financial commitment, right, to James, to sign him to a max deal, to bring him back, even if it were to come back to, play with his son, something like that, in your mind, is there maybe a better use of like that cap allocation if you're the Cavaliers, rather than, risking it on LeBron James kind of in the twilight of his career? I know that it's tough to say the twilight of LeBron's career when he puts up the numbers that he did last season and he shows some signs of slowing down, but he's still able to do some absurd things at 37 years old. So, I mean, is there anybody else that you maybe have on your radar? Do you think that would be the right decision for the Cavaliers if LeBron was like, yes, I want to come home?
I think LeBron should be your option A. I think the fact that LeBron is a bit of a corny dude, he likes the legacy aspect of his career. I think him playing with his son isn't by any means corny. And like you said, there might be some fanfare with it. At least if you draft Bronny and stash him with the Cleveland Charge, you'll be able to sell out your G League games and probably your actual main club games too, which would be kind of neat to see. But I think LeBron would always be your option one. Yes, he is getting older and physically he may start to break down a little bit. Like we saw the groin issues early on with Los Angeles, the high ankle sprain that he dealt with for the better part of his time at the Lakers too. Like there's some obvious signs of him slowing down physically, which is still surreal to think, and also just crazy because he's almost in his 40s, he's in his late 30s, and we're starting to finally see a little bit of the cracks in his physique, which is just a testament to his ability as a player. But I wrote about this a little bit. I think a player that the Cavs kind of bounced around, at least name-wise, before he had just an absurd playoff run and then helped the Warriors win the finals. So this is Andrew Wiggins. I think that's a player that they're kind of exploring the idea of maybe when he was viewed more as not like an albatross, but he was viewed as a solid two-way player at the Warriors. Now like he's really taking that dramatic leap with Golden State. I think if you're just kind of being one of the buzzards that are circling the Warriors, just having to pay everybody on their roster, and I think Golden State will try and make the effort to keep Wiggins because he is an all-star caliber forward, and he could be a part of that young core long-term as well. But you have Steph, you have Clay, you have Jordan Poole down the line, Draymond wants top dollar. I think Jonathan Kuminga is going to be a very good player down the line too, and you have to be kind of worried about the future financial commitments. And Warriors ownership's made it be like crystal clear at this point that they don't want to foot the luxury tax bill when it comes time to pay the pauper at that point. So that's a player definitely keeping worth an eye on. And I think as well, maybe Kyle Kuzma too, just because it may not be a popular name amongst Cavs fans, but my co-host Chris Manning kind of put this bug in my ear probably back when Kyle Kuzma kind of became mayor of Cleveland when he owned them with the Wizards for a hot second. But he makes a lot of sense theoretically because the Cavs are playing Larry Markkinen at the 3 right now, and we all cannot lie to ourselves here and just say Larry Markkinen traditionally is in 3, and Kyle Kuzma is more of a tweener but a bigger body, and kind of fits the identity of what the Cavs want to do. There's some interesting playmaking chops. I think the shooting's there. I think there's the rebounding, the size, the physicality is definitely there too, and I think that would be fun, but I would maintain the stance that LeBron is your option A, and maybe, like I said, if you're the Charge, or the Cavs, you just sign Bronny to a 2-way deal. Maybe C, he ends up being a dude worth investing your time and energy with, but at least you have him under cost control contract, you get his dad back, and then you can sell the heck out of the New Jerseys with either the 6 or the 23 on it. We'll see which one he kind of goes with there. But it'd be fun. But I think Wiggins makes sense. I think Kuzma makes sense. If Chris Middleton, for some reason, doesn't like it in Milwaukee, he makes a ton of sense in Cleveland. I think the Cavs keeping their powder dry next offseason and maybe looking at one of those high-end wings or just allocating those funds to address some more depth concerns, especially on the perimeter, would be a smart way to go about it. Because you really can't kick the can down the road. And I stress this in my article, like, let's say LeBron signs a 1-on-1 with the Lakers. You can't punt to the following offseason and say, okay, well, we'll wait for LeBron again, because the time's kind of now for this Cavs team. It is and it isn't. They're young. but you want to build upon the success of last season. So you don't want to say like, okay, LeBron's our saving grace. And I think that's the nice thing for this Cavs team is you don't really need LeBron to be your saving grace in order to build upon the success. There's other avenues to look at it.
Yeah, this was a Cavs team that found a lot of success even in just the rookie year of Evan Mobley, and that's, bound to hopefully be able to keep building upon that success moving forward. And one of the kind of dominoes that has yet to fall in Cleveland is what's going on with Colin Sexton. What's the latest with him? Are we going to see Sexton ink a deal anytime soon with the Cavaliers, Evan? And, what do you want to see ultimately happen as far as that relationship is concerned?
It's complicated. I always tell folks it's a lot like a long vacation. It's a lot to unpack when you really want to break down the semantics of it. But again, my co-host Chris Manning pointed this out in written form at Fear the Sword that it's now 2 off seasons. The Cavs have at least expressed the lip service that they want to sign Collin and bring him back on some type of contract, but they really haven't made like a concerted effort to do it right away. Like Jared Allen, he was an unrestricted free agent, but all indications were he was going to come back, but the Cavs locked him up right away. They didn't let him test the waters of free agency. Darius Garland, it took a few days in a free agency, but he signed his rookie scale max extension. Evan Mobley down the line, you're going to see that as well. But like Collin, it's a little complicated, and I think a lot of it does come down to money where Sexton in his camp, at least last season, they were offered a deal that was roughly like $18.5 million with incentives, and he wanted to be paid starting guard money, which is $20 million plus. So he bet on himself and unfortunately blew out his knee. The Cavs, at least I thought at the time, that was really going to rock the boat on their season. Colin Sexton is like a really key piece for them, but they kept on winning. They were almost in the playoffs. They're 2 wins in the play-in tournament away from making the playoffs. So like those are some pretty strong arguments if you're the Cavs to say like, hey, we don't have to pay you $20 million. We can offer you $13 million, which is right up against the luxury tax threshold because this is a Cavs team that shouldn't pay the luxury tax for this roster just quite yet. So it's a little awkward. It's a little just icky at this point. Shams Charania noted that Sexton and his camp are kind of comfortable with this dragging out in a training camp and possibly into the beginning of the season. I believe he has until early October to kind of come to terms on it and either take the qualifying offer or not, but the Cavs can extend that deadline and he can ask to have it extended as well if they're still negotiating things. Ultimately, I would like to think he comes back. I think the Cavs putting so much just lip service on the fact that, like, hey, we view Collin as a key cultural piece. We view him as the guy who kind of started this rebuild or renaissance, whatever you want to call it. We view him as XYZ, but maybe he's not the face of the franchise guy. He's not a key core piece at this point, but, like, he is a strong complementary guard, and he kind of figured it out from there. But it's Collin. I mean, if I was Collin, I'd want top dollar for myself too. I would be say like, yeah, that's great. I'd love to come and stay in Cleveland too, but I want to make sure I take care of myself too because you already had one chance of financial security in your face and you bet on yourself and unfortunately it didn't work out. You don't want to do it a second time soon to maximize your earnings and potential. So I think this is going to drag out where, like you and I talked about before we started recording, this is the dog days of the off season. So maybe something comes to fruition before camp, but Rich Paul's done this in the past to the Cavs. Tristan Thompson's dragged out his contract negotiations through training camp and the preseason, and then he signed a deal, I think, right before the season opened. J.R. Smith really dragged things out, and LeBron had to kind of put public pressure on the front office in order to make it happen. So Rich Paul's a type of agent who will maximize his clients' earnings, and this is just classic negotiation. And I had it described to me as a staring contest the other day, and I think at this point you're just waiting for someone to blink, and at least blink hard enough that the other side can just take advantage of that and swoop in and maybe get a deal done.
Could the kid from Akron be headed home to the Cleveland Cavaliers a little bit further down the line, depending on how things play out in LA and, of course, where Bronny Jr. gets drafted? Also, how does the staring contest play out between the Cavaliers and Colin Sexton? You're going to have us covered for all of that and more over at Locked On Cavs. Evan, I appreciate you stopping by Locked On NBA with me.
Thanks for having me.